I'm not going to make the same mistake I made last week, but luckily, because we had no Perrier Awards because of the events of last Friday, I wasn't shown up to be a complete and utter numpty who didn't know what day of the week it was. Because I know what day of the week it is, right? It's Wednesday. And that's when we speak to Neil Oliver. Neil, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you too. I was intrigued by the end of your column in the Sunday Times at the weekend, in which you were kind of casting your eyes towards the north and saying winter is coming. And I thought it was kind of a chilling thought, because with all the things that are going on, particularly in Scotland with the lockdown and increasingly down here as well, you know, I mean, it's almost like you want to say all sorts of things like, you know, the only thing to fear is fear itself, and all sorts of important quotes. But it's still a bit of a worrying time. Nobody knows what's going on.
Oh, it's definitely worrying. That I used that winter is coming line, you know, deliberately echoing the kind of air of trepidation and fear in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
People not knowing what was coming from beyond the wall. But I think the fact that the pandemic so far and all of the lockdown and whatever has unfolded during the hours of daylight, you know, the long spring and the summer, which was pretty kind. It certainly was. It was good weather up here, but it's a whole different game to play in the long dark of winter. And we feel that particularly in Scotland. You know, the nights are a bit longer up here once we get properly into autumn and then winter. And of course, it's the traditional season of colds and flus and all the rest. And how is that going to muddy the waters of all the restrictions and all the anxieties around COVID-19? It's a completely different playing field, winter in Britain, in Scotland. And I just have an air of anxiety that I feel ramping up as I wonder what the dark days of winter are going to deliver for us.
Yeah, exactly right. And also, as I've been saying for a while, without a kind of roadmap out of the tunnel or out of whichever dark place we now find ourselves in, it's very hard to be optimistic. As much as I'm an optimist, as I've said before many times, it's quite difficult if your political kind of leaders don't appear to know where to go next. It's hard to kind of believe in them, really.
I think they've almost and possibly have crossed the Rubicon, so to speak. The position that they've adopted, you know, those, when I say they, I mean the authorities, government, you know, the scientists that are advising them, the civil servants that are applying the rules. I feel as if they're on the other side of the river from a majority of the people. And the faith and the trust is being lost if it hasn't been lost altogether. Yeah. And I feel when you talk about optimism, and I'm desperate to be optimistic as well. And I think for a start, I think anyone with I've got a young family, and you know, you've got to be optimistic, because the kids are asking questions about what does this mean or what does that mean. And so I look back and I think about the experiences that I have had with dealing with people looking to traditional winter. I made a documentary years ago which involved filming in Orkney, and an encounter that I had with a woman there, an older woman, has always lived in my memory. Her surname was Flet, which is a good name from that part of the world. And I said to her, just conversationally, how do you deal with the long nights of the winter up here in the far north? We were in Orkney, and she smiled and she said that she loved it. And her family loved it, because the darkness was a time when they all came together with their wider family. And it was about lights on and candlelight and doing things together as a family with the dark and the heavy weather, you know, blowing its heart out beyond the walls. So it was a time when they reached out to family very intensively. And I think about that in the context of people being told at the moment, you know, not mixing households, that you can't mix the generations. And I think that the lesson was there with that lady in Orkney, that they took a huge strength from one another. And I think somehow we have to find ways in which to do that. I look back as well, as an archaeologist, Stonehenge obviously is one of the iconic archaeological sites in Britain. And there, the evidence increasingly is that it was a focus for people in winter. There was a nearby settlement, which Durrington Walls it's called by archaeologists, and we know that people were coming there in large numbers in the winter, and they were bringing pigs particularly and slaughtering them at the end of the year, and obviously having big feasts, and they were also bringing their dead, the remains of people who had died during the year, and they brought them to Stonehenge at that dark time of the year and interred the bones or the cremated remains. And it was all about gathering together against the dark, with fire, with food, and fundamentally with each other. And I think governments and authorities are playing a dangerous, dangerous game psychologically and socially if they take steps in the winter that divide people. Because we know that for hundreds and for thousands of years, people have drawn great comfort and great energy from one another.
Yes.
And there have to be ways in which we're able to do that, not through computer screens, not virtually, but we have to find back to the ways of coming together in the warmth and sharing stories and getting through the dark times and looking forward to the days lengthening again.
Yes.
It's primeval stuff.
I think it is, because, you know, you think back even to the days of the castles and, you know, King Henry VIII and the Tudors and all of them. And the focal point of every community was the castle, wasn't it? It was where everybody either lived in or lived around. And all of those things you mentioned, you know, fire, people, food. These are all the things that sustain life. And the government appears to be trying to stop all of the things that sustain life, which can only lead to one thing.
And strangely, in the past, really right up into what we would consider the modern era, the doings of kings or rulers or government, it was remote. It didn't really impinge on people's lives. You know, they wouldn't always know who the king was. You know, if word of his name or whatever hadn't filtered down to whatever isolated hamlet they happened to live in. And so people depended upon those that they saw every day, and they ran themselves, and they governed themselves, or they looked to a local dominant figure for direction. And I think bizarrely, the government in this time of so much interconnectedness and so many means of communication, they're making themselves increasingly irrelevant to people's lives, because the things that they're saying, too many people are interpreting what they're being told as stuff they can't use. And it's not because they want to cause trouble and spread infection and do all these things that people are increasingly being accused of doing. It's simply because people have lives to get on with. And the longer this, you can't have a state of emergency that lasts for month after month, year after year. Eventually, however frightened people were, they have to turn again to their own local priorities. And I predict that's what's going to happen. That the more, you know, authoritarian the rules seek to become, perversely or conversely, the more people will have no alternative but to turn their backs on it.
Yes.
And winter's going to be a testing time, because winter's difficult emotionally. You know, people who struggle a bit emotionally and with depression and whatever, and just the general stresses and strains of life. Winter's a challenge anyway.
Right. Well, it's one thing as well to have these COVID marshals who we're actually now seeing more and more out and about, looking down the street to see whether you're not meeting up with too many people. But are they really going to start peering through people's letterboxes and, you know, appearing as the face at the window in the local village and looking into your lounge to see who's in there? Indeed,
I never thought to see the day when there would be such a sense, you know, when you're raised in a community that has, you know, policing by consent, you know, where you have the social contract, you know, where people consent to be governed, where people consent to be policed, because, you know, the police are part of the community and part of society. And by police, you know, now there's, you know, new authority figures in the form of the COVID wardens. I never thought to see the day when there would be such a sense of them and us, which is so. I mean, you know, I've had encounters with the police in the past. I've needed the help of police for various reasons. And, you know, I've always been I am fond and supportive of the police, and I think they've been put in an invidious position at the moment. But this degree of them and us that's unfolding, and you can already hear it at the moment. It's jokey chat amongst people. It feels as if, you know, if you wanted to mix across the generations and mix households, it's going to be like, you know, smuggling people in the boots of cars between.
But West, you know Germany. What? I mean, but it is. But the more people I talk to, the more people I find are less willing than the last time around to do it. You know, and I said this a few weeks ago, if they try and put in a second lockdown, I just don't think people will do it. And what I've seen, and I know it's troubling for a lot of hospitality places and restaurants and pubs, because people are not going there because they don't want to download this app, because they don't think it works, they don't trust it, you know, so that's a problem. But I think more and more people are very willing to break these rules, because as we found out yesterday from Boris Johnson, even he doesn't know what they are.
I don't. I can't keep up. I mean, I'm quite busy at the moment, and so I certainly can't set aside hours of every day to try and see what the latest variation on the spin is, what the latest rule is. But I do know that people are absolutely increasingly of a mind that we went into the last lockdown with open hearts and open minds.
Yeah.
And there was a relatively simple message that was explained that, you know, we can't have everyone getting ill and maybe dying all at the same time. So let's spread it out. But the assumption was, if you thought about it, that people were going to die, but just not all in the one day. It was going to be spread out over into the distant future and not to overwhelm the NHS. And people got that and they complied. But now that with that mission having been accomplished, the fact that the authorities are seeking to apply lockdown yet again with a completely different objective in mind, understandably, many people are thinking, well, were we sold a pup the last time? You know, we flattened the curve. We didn't overwhelm the NHS, but we're still contemplating, goodness knows, another kind of lockdown. And so that doubt sets in at that point.
Yeah, it does.
And doubt is very insidious. Once doubt is there, and once the faith is gone, then the more, it's just like watching the government now is just like watching somebody at the roulette wheel that's lost a ton of money, and rather than walk away from the table, just keeps on heaping more and more chips onto the same numbers. And it's,
Except the problem for us, Neil, is that they're asking us for the money to keep going. And they're saying, you know, I've got a plan. I've got this new strategy. I'm going to change it now and I'm going to do this. And you go, well, hang on, that's the same as the strategy you had last time when you lost all the money.
And you can't keep, I mean, I suppose the analogy is almost like it's like a captive herd. You know, if you've got the animals in the barn and they're not allowed out, and you can't keep milking them in the same way. And so, you know, people are being asked to some, they're still being taxed, they're still having to pay their way, they're still paying, you know, council tax and income tax and all the rest of these, that flow of money that's required to keep the state running. But at the same time, those people aren't being allowed out to, you know, to take the energy that they need to keep producing the milk that's been taken from them by the government to circulate out into the wider society. You have to let the herd out into the green fields to rejuvenate from time to time. You can't just keep them in the barn and keep milking them. No.
Well, exactly. And I thought of you this morning, funnily enough. I was on the tube, which I've started to use again just because the roads are so crazily busy, really. And everyone's wearing a mask. And I know that London commuters are not famous for speaking to one another, but there's literally no conversation going on now at all. Nobody's talking to anybody else. They're all getting on the escalator. And as I was going up the escalator, there were all these signs that said, be kind, right? And I just thought, how ironic is that, right? Nobody's talking to one another. We're told to be kind under pain of death. And I thought of that famous 1984 movie with John, I think it was John Hurt years ago, you know, where they're all sort of being told what to do by Big Brother. And it's starting to feel like that.
Where you've got, you know, we've talked about this before, where you have a situation that can only work if people are coerced. I keep on hearing people on television at the moment using the word compliance. That's one that's crept into the vocabulary now, which I find that sinister. You know, that always makes me think about that big robot in Robocop 1. You know, you have 10 seconds to comply, and, you know, before the machine guns open fire. And where you have to keep people, where you have to enforce a system by intimidation and different levels of fear, and even possibly the threat of, you know, imprisonment and all the rest of it, that's not going to work for people. And you have to allow for the way in which people left to their own devices actually relate to one another, and the circumstances under which people find ways to be kind to one another. Yeah. And they're messing with, we're forgetting what people actually are like. You know, I've written just recently about the fact that although it's been, you know, 200,000 years of our species, and we've got all the modern trappings around us, we're essentially physiologically and cognitively the same creatures that we were 200,000 years ago. You know, we're still running hunter software on our poor little brains, and we're still needing each other. this is the thing. We are social creatures. We come together naturally in tribes, in clans, in families, quite small groups. We don't usefully work with more than about 150 people, according to some other writers. But if you deny people that, this separation of people into frightened individuals, or just mum, dad, and a couple of kids isolated in their houses, you compromise the integrity of the species itself. We cannot live like this. And people understand that there's an abiding threat in the form of the virus, but they've also internalized the blatant reality that it's not going to go away. And the fact that that scientists and the authorities have had the vanity and the hubris to suggest that if we let them do whatever they want for a period of time, they can fix it completely, make it go away. Well, too many people have realized that the virus isn't going to go away. It's going to be here like the flu. And even if there is a vaccine in the future, there'll be a vaccine, maybe a different one every year, and it'll have a certain effect, but people will still catch COVID like they catch everything else, and some people will die. And if they've set a precedent now where if there are any infections, any cases of COVID in the future, that they have to lock us down, then that poses a profound threat to society itself.
Yes. And they can't keep just saying be kind. Well, all the measures that they're trying to bring in are making the exact opposite effect, so that you can't be kind to anybody because you can't see anybody, and you can't go and see your parents or your children or your uncles or your aunties. It's ridiculous.
What does kindness even mean? You can't make kindness something else that you have to. You can't make being kind another rule that you have to obey.
Yeah.
People are instinctively kind. It's not something that you can legislate for. You can't say an hour or 5 minutes today when everyone is compelled to be kind. That's just farcical.
I know.
And you cannot you can't just make all of the time prioritize the same single risk. If your house is burning down and you're standing in it and someone's shouting from the window outside, this year's flu is a very bad one. Your priority is still the fact that your house is burning down.
Right.
You may, at some point in the short to medium future, pay attention to the fact that the flu is bad this year. But people have their own priorities, their own, making a living, paying the mortgage, meeting the rent, looking after elderly parents, seeing to, children that are going through some kind of, serious emotional anxiety. And they have to prioritize different things at different times. And this increasingly authoritarian attempt to make everyone make COVID the number one priority 100% of the time is a fool's errand.
Yeah. And I'm seeing more and more criticism of Nicola Sturgeon, Neil, from sometimes surprising places, people that I know personally and other people that I know on social media who are supporters of independence perhaps, but have even now decided that she's going too far, because we see Scotland as even more draconian now than the rest of the country.
Well, the debacle over the universities was just was breathtaking. I would have thought that without, I think the First Minister and those around her, they get treated differently than, say, Boris and the people around him get treated. Although broadly speaking, they are applying the same strategy based on the same preferred version of science. There isn't really a Rizla cigarette paper to slip between the tactics, really. No. And the numbers have always been bad in Scotland, and the number of care home deaths were always bad. But there's been a very lenient approach to the government here, as opposed to the way that most of the mainstream media has treated the government in Westminster. But I think because of what happened over the students and the universities, that veil, that optical illusion has been sort of stripped away. It's like in The Wizard of Oz when they see the little man behind the curtain, yeah. And the reality of the situation has become much more apparent. And it's that COVID is, broadly speaking, doing here what it has done everywhere else in the country. No one's in control of it. No. It's just that some people have had a better view cast on their treatment of the situation than others. But I think finally the rising water of inevitability has finally reached Nicola Sturgeon's shoes as
The
well.
plimsoll line has been breached. Yeah. What about your kids at school? What are they being told? Because some of the kids down here are being told, prepare to go home again because we're going to shut the school down.
Well, that's always been out there. That phantom was there really from the day and hour that they went back to school, 6 weeks ago now. I have to say, our kids are all at a state high school here in Stirling, and it's been great. The feedback that we hear via what the teachers are saying to our kids and what the kids are repeating to us, they are a very positive, pragmatic lot in our school, and we've been very reassured by what they've been being told. But it's matters. We understand also that it's matters out of the control of the school, and the possibility of what they call blended learning. We know that preparations are being made again in case they need to move to blended learning, as they call it, which is, well, however, might be, you're only at school 2 weeks in 4 or 1 week in 4, and the rest of it would be home schooling. Our kids are as anxious about the future as everybody else. My eldest would be looking to university next year, and still is, but it's shrouded in uncertainty. And she looked on at what happened to the intake this year with horror at what unfolded in the universities at Glasgow and in Edinburgh. And then my boys are younger, but they're so aware, and it is quite heartbreaking looking on at it, because I remember being, as you do, being 12 and being 14 and being 17, and I'm in amongst all the things that I might have been having to deal with as a young adolescent or a young adult at that time. There was nothing like this.
No.
And I feel very strongly that the kids, the younger people, the younger generation, what they need is some sense that there will be an end. People talk about an exit strategy, and it's so vital, I think, that the younger generation can see that there's a normal, and I don't mean a new normal, I mean a normal.
Yeah.
Getting back to be able to see your friends, go on holiday, play in the park, meeting each other's houses, that kind of normal. The normal that is normal, not new normal. New normal, I refuse to use that expression apart from when I'm talking to you just now.
Yeah.
That's an abomination to me.
Yeah.
There is no new normal. There's only normal. And we all know what it looks like, and it's not this.
It really isn't, no.